Welcome to Studio 42, where we have moving conversations about contentious and consequential topics. Today, our topic is Good and Evil with Mustapha Jordan. He is an international professional wrestler, having wrestled all over Canada, Ireland, and Australia, also an inspiring speaker and two-time Canadian champion. Please help us welcome Mustapha Jordan. And with us, thanks. Hey, how are you?
Hello. All unbreakable. You?
Good. And from Studio 42, we have me, Jeff Brown, Abhishek, Christian, David, and Raf. So hello to everybody. Uh-oh,
Everyone.
there's feedback. Whoever that is, please turn off your speakers or your microphone. So Mustapha, I heard this rumor that professional wrestling is fake. Is that true?
Unfortunately, no. It is not fake. It is, in itself, it's a collage of multiple arts and sports. So for example, it borrows from various types of martial arts and arts with the sole goal of it entertainment. Now, you have to go back to, I'd say, the 1910s and 20s to really understand why today it may come off as fake. Back in those times, you used to have contests, and they were based off of catch-as-catch-can wrestling, which is the grandfather of pro wrestling and modern MMA. Now, there was a contest that lasted 9 hours. Because it went so long, a lot of people were like, I can't stand this, I'm out. So a lot of people started to leave the arena. And because of this, the promoters started to go, okay, there has to be a way in which we can keep them interested, but it cannot last that long. So as the years progressed, they started to find ways to, based on a crowd's a reaction or the talent or the story they're currently trying to convey, they will say, okay, tonight this is what should go down. In a way, it is the outcomes in a lot of fights are predetermined. However, the story and how you get to that outcome is what it makes it a beautiful sport and art.
Okay, so it's like half scripted, half
Yes,
improv.
Half improv, half script, because at any time anything can go wrong. And then in that example, they will say that this is what is supposed to A is supposed to happen, but in reality C, D, E, F, G had happened. Because they have happened, well, the whole outcome has changed. And so it's there's a lot more to it than just passing it off as fake. Like a lot of wrestlers, we have a background in martial arts. So what differentiates us between MMA and boxing is that our job is to entertain you so that we understand what's going on. I can put you in a wrist lock, a headlock, a hammer lock. You want to understand what any of that is, and as a fan, you're like, well, what's that? But my job is to draw you in with characters between good and bad.
This is what I wanted to ask you about. And so I understand in wrestling, you have the good guys and you call them the faces, and you have the bad guys and you call them the heels, right?
Right.
Right. And you've played both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you find is the difference between being a heel and being a face?
Historically, and from my experience, being a heel is a tougher task, because your job is to make them despise you so much that they will literally want to fight you, but they can't. See, now they have to live vicariously through the face or the good guy in hopes that they overcome you. You are a a microcosm, are a reflection of all of the stuff that's going on in their lives. So by me, let's say I was a heel, my job will be to, how do I evoke such strong emotions from people I do not know, and how do I evoke it in a way that it is within a confines or context that is still respectful, but yet enough to evoke an emotion of, I hate this guy, I want him to lose, I want his health basically burnt down. But at the same edges, on the same sword, the same side of the other side of the same sword, a bad heel makes it twice as hard for a good face for people to care about that person. So if I do a bad job of getting you guys to boo me and jeer me and want to fight me, then your job as a face is to have to convince them to like you and hate the heel. And if I do a bad job, I failed. And if I fail, then it makes it hard to convince the audience that, hey, we're actually watching a live film in front of us.
You're kind of confirming this. I don't know if, oh, whoever that is, turn that off, please. Abhishek, you shared this video before, and it was about one of the things that they said in it is that people go for the it's actually the heel that draws the audience, right? People go not because they love the hero, but because they hate the villain and they want to see him get his ass kicked. And
yes, a good heel knows how to bring that out of you. Also, even in most films that you watch, maybe in today's time it has changed, but for most of that I've watched, the bad guy always enters from the right side of the stage. The good guy always enters from the left. Why is that? Because the bad guy would have his back towards you, like he doesn't care. Even in speaking, when we have a contest, you go to shake someone's hand. You enter. The only thing you enter from the right is to shake the introductor's hand. By doing a handshake, you have open body language. But for the most part, in most films, the good guy or girl always comes from the left side.
that's kind of messed up in terms of what it says about human nature, though, right? That the whole draw of the wrestling show is to hate on somebody.
Yes, and it's also hating on what they stand for. But you have to be careful to not be something that is attacking someone in the audience based on what they believe in or their political stance, but enough to make them go, I want to see him get the snot be out of him. But now, between the dynamic between faces and heels, it's a never-ending story with multiple chapters. Why is that? Is because if, for example, the bad guy, he would win. If he wins, and they're coming back the following month or the following year or whenever they're coming back to that town, those people are paying money to see that bad guy loses. And you see a lot in boxing and also in MMA. And in recent times, think of Conor McGregor. People are paying money to see him lose. In boxing, Mayweather is a huge draw because he's cocky, he's arrogant, he's a bad guy, but people want to see him lose. I see someone has their hand up.
Oh, you guys can just talk. Don't put your hand up.
All right, I'm too polite like that. Anyways, I would like to just add something to what Mustapha said. I think an interesting thing to point out is about how wrestling worked before, which was the territories. So like a wrestler would usually tour around in a region, and then they would have a series of matches, maybe the same one or the other one, and then they would leave for a while and go someplace else. And so a general idea in terms of like the the thing that caught or drew the people in again was about building a rematch. So you would keep it in a way that like the usual crescendo of it all is like the face finally coming, getting the comeuppance against the heel. And so like this is the reason why like you would have this territory system, as it was called, and you would have like a small story taking place, and then the guy would leave for a while, and then he would come back, and then like everybody would be excited again. So just to add to the context of what he was saying.
Was there like this?
Exactly that. Exactly that. All right. I cut you off.
Was there this funny thing where you'd be the face or the hero in your territory, and then you'd go outside and be the villain? They'd have like this in-group, out-group thing going on.
It does happen. Like it's a roller coaster of emotions, and it's exactly Abhishek was saying, is that it's a wave of emotions to have the payoff. The payoff will be the face wins the war, but in between he will lose, or she would lose, some of the battles, and I will continue and feed that people want to see. Okay, do they finally win? And it's like a saying in wrestling that there's money in the chase. The chase is whatever the end goal is, and how much of people are invested in this story.
So, I want to just jump in on something that I'm not a huge wrestling fan. Like I don't watch it today, but when I was young back in the 80s, and it was pretty big at that point, and I'd seen kind of the what was those Saturday those big WWF where everybody was in the cage, and I forget what they had a name for that.
The Royal Rumble.
The Royal Rumble. That's it. And they had like 7 or 8 of them. And Andre the Giant was one of those at some point. And I'd seen I saw a documentary on Andre the Giant, and I remember very, very vividly when Hulk Hogan described one of his matches against him. It was later on in his life where Andre went to the dark side, and he was very worried because he had pissed off Andre the Giant, but he was sort of scheduled. He was scripted to win that fight. But the pre-fight, he said, I wasn't sure if he was going to let me win the fight. And I thought that was really hilarious because, Andre the Giant was like this massive force that, I don't think anybody could really beat him if they wanted to, right? So really my question, like what I wanted to cover was this idea of flipping from the heel, from the face to the heel and then back. I mean, this is to me one of the most interesting aspects of the these wrestling, the WWF and the other is just how does a character go from the light to the dark and back? Because Andre the Giant did it, Hulk Hogan did it, and then in the past you had this guy called the Iron Sheik who was just a natural heel, right? Because you had this Iran versus USA thing going, and I thought these are the most interesting narratives to watch, and just how crowds sort of attach to their value, they attach to their value systems. So I'm just wondering, in your experience, like how does it happen for you? Like how do you go from being a face to a heel and back with your own? Because do you change as a person, or do you betray somebody, or like, I don't know. That's really what I'm curious about.
I see. It's a bit of there's a 2 parts to this question. The first part, think of Lex Luthor or Joker. There's something that triggered them to go, I had enough of this. I'm gonna do it my way. But at no point they feel that they are a bad guy. Now a good bad guy never walks around and says, hey, I'm bad, boo me or hate on me. It's the subtle things that they do that will make you go, okay, he's cocky or arrogant or greedy. It's these ingrained things in our society that is deemed as bad, and we use those things we take those things to highlight them, and then with that you'll be able to transfer from good to bad. But every bad guy has 3 to 5 distinct characteristics. Find the exact opposite, and then you get a good guy. Now, going back and forth depends on merchandise sales. What is the goal of the prom- prom- promotion or company? What is their long-term goal? What is their short-term goal? Like you can be a good guy for a period of time, and then there comes a point where you're stagnant. So they go, how can we make the story? How can we flip the story in which it captivates the audience, our new generation of audience, but maintain the one that is currently here? Because you don't want to tune in and go, I already knew that was what was going to happen. Next, if you do that in terms of business, you failed. So you have to always adapt, and also where you are in the world. Like the story you tell in North America is not the same story you're going to tell in Japan. Like in Japan, there's a ingrained story from 1956 till now that is the local always defeats the foreigner in the end. Now, how that story is told, depending on the styles in which they choose to display it, that's a different story. Because there's a difference of styles, a different style of martial arts, as well as what is the overall goal of that company, and why are they positioning you to be the face? Or right now you're the face. Okay, so in 5 years or 3 years, where do we go from there? And if there's nothing, then they'll tell you, okay, we're gonna build a story that something happens, and then you go, you know what? I'm done with that. But at certain points throughout that phase that you're in, you seem to see a light at a certain point. And the question is, do you go towards it, or do you stay where you are and see how far can?
But who decides that for you? Is that the league that decides that, or do you decide that as an individual wrestler?
Generally, it's the league.
Right, they'll tell you to flip over.
Yeah.
Right.
They'll tell you, okay, in merchandise sales and popularity, attendance, TV ratings, all these things are factors as to why you're a good guy or a bad guy.
So they'll create a situation where you can flip the script.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's a certain set of basic values you talk about. Like you have to be, like you said, so you go from being a nice guy, a gentleman, to being an asshole,
Yes.
or you betray your old friend, and that's all been seen as a negative thing.
Yes.
Right. So things like that sort of are kind of primordial societal, connective tissue, right?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Like in the sense of heels and faces, usually I've seen like there's these ingrained value in a face and a heel. Like the heel would be arrogant. He would usually cheat. And there are like these certain sets of values, as Mustapha pointed out. But the interesting thing is like heels and faces are usually the common like types of characters you'll see. But like recently, there's the emergence of tweeners. And I think like that's the most tricky character to get.
Two what? I missed that. Two what?
They are called tweeners. So like it's the general idea is they're neither a face nor a heel. They're just like, you like them because they're badass. And they're like kind of lone wolf type characters. Usually the story, like it's interesting because even the dynamic of matches and how they are built, you usually don't see a heel versus heel match because the dynamic is very hard because the crowd won't be invested into anything, right? But there can be cases where you'll have a tweener and he can go against a bad guy or he can go against a good guy and you are cheering for him no matter what. Like that is the most interesting dynamic that I find. And there's also the aspect of like how to turn a character into heel or baby face, right? So you would have like
what's a baby face?
Like the face is the full word for the base face is a baby face.
Can you have like two faces fight each other for like a championship?
You can, because you can have it, because then there's like the idea is that they're fighting for the respect of one or the other. In most of the stories that I've seen, like it usually leads to a turn, but like turn would be like either you turn from a baby face to a heel or back. And there are even cases like I just know of one, but a match starts, one guy is a heel, the other one is a face, and the match ends, and like the dynamic has shifted. And the most famous one is Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Bret Hart, where like the guy who walked in as a heel, like he passes out and he shows this great struggle in overcoming who was supposedly the face. And because of the cruelty he's shown in the match, he turns out to be the heel. And when he leaves, like everybody's booing him.
Yes, but I love that point and example, because if you were to go back and watch the beginning of that story, you will see that there's a build up to just subtle things. At the face is getting frustrated. Okay, I'm doing all of the right things, and you choose to cheer him. So the promoters are like, that guy who's supposed to be bad, he's doing stuff that the fans like, and slowly but surely there was a slow shift, and the payoff was the double turn. Is the term that we use when a face becomes heel and a heel becomes face.
Do you find it difficult to maintain a fan base if your character is shifting so drastically?
In today's time, yes. And right now, we've gone from a period of time where everything had to be, I'm a bad guy, I have to just, I'm a bad guy, I have to stay like that at all times. Like right now, I'm talking to you as me. But if I was in character, good or bad, I have to remain with that character. But with the advent of the popularity in some social media, because of that, you're able to build a fan base, regardless if you're good or bad. And since you have built a loyal fan base, they will follow you throughout your changes. If you go back several years ago, generally the heel is the more experienced guy, because our women. And why is that? Is because they are the conductors of chaos. They will control the temperature and how the fans will react at certain points.
So, right now as a heel, like, what are the characteristics that you like? So my question: what are the characteristics that you have to maintain? And then when you go to becoming a face, let's say in the future, you're obviously overcoming those, right? You need to now sort of change your own persona, I would imagine, right?
Yes.
So what are the characteristics right now that embody this kind of heel character for you in the present moment?
Arrogant, loud, outspoken.
Okay.
If I was to be face, not to say I'm heel or face in this current time, but if I was to be face, it would be the exact opposite to that.
But how can your character maintain that? Like, does the crowd buy that kind of a transfer? You were an arrogant asshole before, and now you're a kind, polite, wrestler, which is kind of like
that's the extremes. But once you find who you are in this sport, my character, regardless if I'm good or bad, or face or heel, good or bad, is the same goal. I'm coming for the championship, or whatever is the top prize. So how I carry myself and how I speak, and it may have a subtle change.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall goal is, you have it, I'm coming to take it from you.
So you said that you carry your fan base throughout these transformations. Like, do people actually stick with you even if you go, let's say, dark? Because that seems like I don't know, like
the loyal fans, yes.
Okay.
The casual fan who tunes in once a year, you're like, I hate this guy, or I love this guy. The casual fans is the ones who would swing more towards, okay, I don't know if I can do this guy. Okay, I'll watch this guy. I like this guy. But your loyal fans, regardless of where you are, they're like, I'm following you. I want to boo you. I want to hate you, and that's what you want as a performer, because these people are the loyal fans are going to pay are going to pay to go. I'm going to cheer you or boo you or buy or buy a shirt. The casual fans are the ones who fill arenas. So you have to be able to be a businessman and knowing within your character, knowing when to dial it up a bit.
So the people who like arrogant, loud wrestlers, are they also arrogant, loud, or like how does that dynamic work? You know?
Because because they're living vicariously through us, there's certain elements that you will see in yourself. Those are the top three that comes to mind. But there's other ones, and for you to recognize it, I mean, there's something that is already within,
Or that they respect from, yeah, right. It's kind of,
So Ralph, like I think it would be simpler if I have like a term introduced. So basically there's a Mark who just to him, he's just there for the entertainment. For him, everything happening is happening real. And then there's a term which is the Smark, which is a smart kind of guy who knows that, oh, it's a performance, but he likes it. And he's like willing to indulge in the storytelling and all of that. And I think like whenever a character changes their like from babyface to heel, I think what draws people in is if the character has sufficient motivation to do so. Because there's a funny thing that has happened in a lot of cases where a person would turn heel and the next day they would come up and be like, oh, I turned heel because you people didn't care about me. And it's become such a cliche in like WWE that like everybody makes fun of it now because it's like, oh, that's the lamest motivation ever for people to do it. And sometimes even if the character tries to do it, people kind of call it out and they don't want the character to turn heel. That actually happened. Like one of the characters, Becky Lynch, like she caught fire and she became like super famous, but the company didn't want to portray her as a face. So they told her to go on stage and start saying this like cliche thing, like, oh, you people never supported. And people were still cheering for her because they were just like, oh yeah, like I recognize what this character is. And like, I think like this is one of the biggest aspects that I really like most of the good wrestlers, they know what their character is. They know what their motivation is. And as long as they have like this thing is not just, oh, my company told me to just portray this, so I am this. Like instead, like they come up with a story and like a reason why they are the way they are. And I think like generally, like nobody really likes heels. Like smarks, like people who are like smart marks, they usually like heel for how good they are at being bad. But usually like in the sense of like morality, you are usually like, oh, this guy is a piece of crap, like he needs to be beaten because of his like arrogance and his like faults.
but behind the scenes, most of these guys are nice guys, right? I mean, most people understand that, right? I mean,
like I think most people are performers. Like at the end of the day, it's the question that you asked, Jeff, in the beginning, like is it like fake? Well, it's fake to an extent when you can say a theater is fake, like the play is fake. It's not about whether it's real or not. It's about the story that it's being.
I mean, these guys are still great athletes, you know. I mean, the moves you guys make, Mustapha. I mean, I wouldn't dare try that. I mean, that looks like it hurts. I mean, I don't know how you guys put yourself through that, like every week or whatever, how often you do it, but. I mean, I definitely respect the athleticism of it, and then there's the theater aspect of it, which you're right. Like once you sort of connect that, it is a fantastic entertainment. You know, I mean, I can see why there's such a draw, and yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's like I said, like most of these people, like behind their character, they're the guys that are probably like they're normal, they're normal people, right? Yeah. They're nothing like their on-stage character, just like an actor isn't anything like their on-stage.
On this point, I have one interesting thing like that I've kind of noted and seen throughout the years. A lot of the wrestlers, usually the old timers, like for them, like the idea of maintaining your character no matter what, wherever you are, is called kayfabe, right? So they were like even crazier about kayfabe than like most people now. Like Mustapha, like being here, like talking like to us and just interacting like a human being and not as a performer, like that would be breaking kayfabe. But nowadays it's like with Twitter and stuff, people have like become more humanized. But before, there used to be heels who would just like be that all the time. Like if you see them anywhere, they would act like that. And it's interesting because I've like heard this thing from some wrestlers before, where a lot of the times what they do is they take their own characteristics of who they are as a person and they just dial it up to 11.
Yes.
And that's how they portray a character which is even relatable to them. Because when you are performing, like if the character is relatable to you, you know what its motivations are, etc.
It's exactly that. It is yourself. Let's say that you're normally a good person. Find five characteristics that would describe yourself, and find five of their exact opposites. And now you have a heel and a face you, but it's still you.
And what has happened over time, like from the stories that I've heard, some of the characters like Jake the Snake Roberts comes to mind. Like his past has been like very like he was very self-destructive at some points, and a part of the reason was he couldn't like not be his character at some points. Like he thought that he was the person he was portraying out there, and that really impacted his life. So like it's interesting because to me it even feels like there's something going on in cognitive sciences where you are playing a character so much. It's like method acting. So you're being a character so much that it kind of becomes a part of you as well. And if it's a heel, then it might have destructive tendency. Like you might drive those destructive tendencies inwards towards the person that you are, which is like super fascinating.
Well, I guess when you're playing a part, there's always a feedback loop, right? Like you're acting this character who's a villain, but maybe sometimes you think to yourself, like maybe my character has a point on this one issue, and you change as a person because you're portraying somebody else.
I have a question about the technical aspects of it. You said in the beginning that the outcome is determined, and I guess a few of the events that happen in between. But I want to know, like, how much of it is like impromptu? How much of it is just you have to kind of come up with it on the spot, or like when you practice with a guy that you're gonna fight, do you practice the entire fight, or and then you do the exact same thing during the event, or a bit more improvised than that?
At the event, I'd say 80% is reading and reacting solely. Improvise. 80 to 90% of the match is improvised. You have a general set ideas of what you want to do, but it can always change. Let's say you and I were to have a fight, and we have an idea of how the match is going to go, and out of nowhere, the crowd they start to chant red shirt, red shirt. Are we going to stay and focus on what we're supposed to do, A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Or are we going to react and change things around? Maybe A becomes Z and Z becomes A, and when we're ready, we'll go to Y, then we'll go to J. Then J can be absolutely nothing. It could be you and I just taking off a shirt and putting it on. It all depends on your ability to read and react. Generally, for a cushion of safety, if I don't know you, you don't know me, that's when we want to go, okay, this is what I want to do, this is what you want to do, how do we make this work and tell a story based on what the promoters want. And that's the part where it's choreographed. But then again, it could always change. If 30 seconds in, I knock you out, everything that we plan goes right out the window. So now we have to come up with a way, okay, or vice versa, 30 seconds in, I break my arm. We have to find a way to continue it without screwing up. So all the things that you plan on doing, or the things I plan on doing, it immediately changes.
Yeah, interesting thing. I don't know how true it is across promotions, but in a lot of promotions, the referees are told to count the counts as if they were real. So like if by mistake somebody like kind of not is not able to raise their shoulder in time,
Yes.
then they would have to end the match and declare somebody else the winner.
Yes, it's exact, and it comes from the fact that we're in the age of MMA. So we cannot come off looking. It can't come off looking like, oh, I'm supposed to count. No, if it's a straight up fight, so you're going to count regardless of if this person was supposed to win or not. They are professionals, and we're and it's a business. It is your best interest to do what is called upon you. But hey, again, things happen in strange ways.
But so those kind of surprises, I think, are good for business, because, watching, one of the reasons I always turned away is because I knew who was going to win, the majority of the time.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like I can see the pattern of, okay, the hero's going to start the fight well, or the villain's going to start the fight well, and he's going to pin the hero down, and then it's going to become very close, and he's going to jump off the mat, just as the ref is counting 3, and then somehow there's going to be this pattern where the villain's killing the hero, and it looks like all is lost. It's very much a Hollywood script, but the hero out of nowhere just finds this courage and the strength to overcome all this and all this, this insurmountable sort of mountain, and he picks himself up, and it becomes a story for the ages, right? And so I find that if you had a surprise where the hero, for whatever reason, was just injured and couldn't get himself off the mat and was forced to lose the match, I would think it would create a great story for the next match, for the rematch, and then it would draw in a lot more people, because suddenly what I was expecting didn't happen. It's like, wait a second, maybe it's not scripted. And so I think it adds that element of it. I don't think I ever saw Hulk Hogan lose a match throughout the years that I was watching. He always found a way to win, and I found that a little bit tiring personally, because I wanted to see. I guess I was rooting for the heels, the underdogs, for whatever reason. I guess there's something deep and disturbed about my own sort of history or my own personality somewhere.
Or maybe not. Maybe it's just the fact that you don't. It's an expression that you don't want to become a favorite. You don't want to become the New York Yankees, the New York Yankees of whatever you're doing. They're supposed to win the championship. You happen to be, I don't know, Colorado, and you win. It was like Colorado won the World Series.
Right.
So at a certain point, back especially in the 80s, WWF at the time, they had a large, it was like a parallel to being super heroes. So you had your Superman, you had your Batman, you had these characters. So there were plays off of them, but in their own way. So like, I guess Hulk Hogan, he'd be Superman, and him always having to win. But the thing is now, as you get older, you're like, I'm tired of seeing him win. But the 4-year-old in the audience who wants to see him win, and he wins, like it gives him joy. But it all depends where the story is. Because if he wins every time, it's like, yeah. But if he loses in between, and then at the biggest fight, you don't know if he could win.
Right, and that's key to that element of anticipation, not knowing the end of the story. Like when we watch a movie, we don't want to know the ending. Exactly. So, how is it today? Has that sort of has that model changed today in the world of
today? It has. It has, depending where, but for the most part, it has. A lot of times you've been watching a match and you think that person's going to win. They're cooking or they're fighting from underneath and they lose. You're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And also, the fact that we're competing with other combat sports, it forces us to up our game and tell a different story. Because even though that guy's gonna win all the time, okay, but if it was just straight up martial arts, would he win every single time? I don't know.
Yeah, I was trying to get some stats about who wins the majority of the matches in these wrestling kind of world. Whether the good guy won, the majority, and I got a sense that the good heroes, they had like a strong, 80-90% win rate, and then the heels had like a 75% win rate. They were still strong heels because they had to be, they had to be strong. But ultimately, when they went up against the heroes, I would imagine they would lose, right? But I saw like a bit of a difference in terms of percentage of wins, and so I was trying to understand like how they figure that out, how they figure that ratio out to keep the story kind of interesting.
I think how you win is also quite important in that regard.
Yeah.
Like there are cases where like the heel might just beat the face like clean, and then you'd not be interested in this face because, oh, this guy just lost. Like, but there are cases where like the heel might win, but like
Right.
the word is over, like you get more over, it means the people are more invested in you, your character, who you are. And like the best kind of matches is where both of them fight, whoever wins, you are invested in both of them more even before you were in the match. Like there have been cases where a guy would be like really good, but then one bad loss and his momentum would be like gone, because the way he lost was just like took everything underneath him. So like the story of a match like really decides if people, even if you lose, like if people are for you or against you. So it's quite
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have to say, like, it's just to me, it's just watching it like from that point of view. It's really something.
I'm curious, Mustapha, how you kind of seen the roles of good and evil change over the course, maybe even the course of like your wrestling career. But like you mentioned before, like you look back at the '80s, like Hulk Hogan's intro is literally like "I'm a real American," and there was all these dynamics of kind of like global politics. And I watched a lot of kind of like the Attitude Era and things like that. Um, like the role of evil, do you think that there is still the same characteristics, or that those have kind of like shifted as kind of the world's narrative has changed?
That's a good question. I believe is not as straightforward as it used to be overall. Like you would see that guy is from X place in the world and he comes to Canada. Oh, I hate that guy because he's from X place. Today, that doesn't fly. So how do you maintain the core values that make you go, that guy's a piece of work, or girls is a piece of work? And knowing that without having to push the context of I'm American, I'm better than all of you, or I'm Canadian. Because in Japan, you're American coming to Japan, and they hate you automatically. You are a villain. You're like they
and you are called the gaijin.
Yes, you're called a gaijin, which is foreigner. And the root story there from 1956 from Ricky Doza up until now is the foreigner, big bad, comes over and fights against the local hero. And how does he overcome him is the story that he's going to tell throughout various chapters.
But there's one factor which is quite interesting, which is like called basically heat is what you get as a heel, which is like just hatred and the crowd booing you and stuff.
Right.
And the funny thing is like a lot of these like xenophobic tropes and stuff, they make for a very easy way for people to hate you. Like one of the cheapest way to get heat, like it's literally called cheap heat, is just go to a town and make fun of the people in that town, and then people like quickly will be against you. Like there was this case very recently where they went to Seattle or something, and then they just said something like in WWE, they said something about a team there, and the crowd booed them nonstop for 8 minutes.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
it was just amazing.
But it's because sometimes you gotta gauge it. Like if it's like sports teams, you can laugh at that. But if it's like what you believe in or your orientation, that is off limits. So it's like you gotta gauge how to get your cheap heat, but also like to rope them in. Once you get that hook up, the Seahawks or this and that, they're gonna boo you. So now you have to come up with a follow-up, but not keep it in the realm of cheap heat. Get that cheap heat off the context of the Seahawks and bring it towards you if you are the heel.
This brings me to an interesting question for you, Mustafa. So, like in comedy, like one of my interests apart from wrestling is comedy.
Okay.
So in comedy, like one of the things that is tricky for performers nowadays is to kind of tread this line of not really offending somebody while also like touching upon these subjects which are kind of like on the limits of what is considered decent conversation or something. And on top of that, there's this idea that it's a performance. So what the character says, like even for stand-ups, like
Yeah.
what the character says or what how he like believes, what he shows he believes it is not really what his actual beliefs are. And they get a lot of like a lot of like heat basically in the media for the same reason.
Okay.
Like they get this like, oh, you said this joke, that's why you mean this and you're a bad person.
Right.
And I don't know how nicely this line is tread, because like a lot of people, at least like even I've seen like cases where there are people who really think that, oh, this person is just saying bad things about this town and he hates it, but it's not the case. Like you have to take there's a difference between a performance
Right.
and what you believe in, and then there's a difference between like what you're saying in a performance. How do you like see that line in wrestling and like tread that line in wrestling really?
I mean, there's things you can make fun of, like, but it's verbal judo. He told me, Mustafa, I hate your pen. Well, I have to come up with a creative way to make fun of you. Don't in a way that you don't have a pen. You maybe are you right with snot, but a way that to make you feel get offended, but never to the point where it's like I don't want to be here. Because if I shut you down and you're giving me and you're throwing jabs at me like verbal jabs, and I have to react fast, but not to the point where you stay quiet. And then you stay quiet, everyone goes quiet. I don't get reaction. Then I fail, or I don't maintain that heat. Then the person who I'm facing off against has to work 10 times as hard to make them care if they win or lose.
So I'm wondering, have there, because when you talk about like narrate like current topics that are affecting where back then it was the Iran Sheik, and I think there was a King Kong Bundy in there who's like sort of being likened like a big ape.
Right.
I don't think those kind of labels would work today because they're culturally sensitive.
Right.
I'm wondering, has there been like an openly gay wrestler on the circuit?
Yes, in fact, there's a few depending where you go in the leagues. Recently, WWE has a wrestler by the name of, well, had a wrestler because he had left, by the name of Darren Young,
Okay.
and he came out, I believe it was 2016 or 17, and
Interesting.
it opened the door for a lot of American people to be comfortable to be comfortable in themselves, because a lot of people, they are a certain way, but they will like mask. I'm talking like behind the scenes. They are a certain way to be, and they'll mask it because of fear of this and this and that. But in today, it's, oh, okay, so you're of this orientation. All right, cool. Let's just work.
So this was a character who was really openly gay, and he came out onto the circuit, and he was accepted as was he a hero? Yeah, I guess he would have been a hero, right?
Yeah, it was on CNN and everything.
Was he one of the hero characters in the wrestling leagues, or how did they use that? It was what I'm curious about.
He had recently changed from being bad to good.
Okay.
At the time, you did not know anything about his personal life, and then
Yeah, right.
later on you found out, oh, okay, cool. They didn't try to use that for publicity. They were just, I found, maybe I saw it wrong, but they didn't use it for publicity. They use it more of a, okay, we accept everybody. Like
Right.
currently in a promotion known as AEW, which is the second biggest promotion in the States, they have a transgender performer by the name of Nyla Rose, and she is the first openly transgender competitor at this level. And as well, she had recently won and lost the women's championship.
One thing interesting about Nyla Rose is like in one of her interviews, she said like one of the first places where she found a kind of acceptance was in wrestling.
Yes.
But it's like very anecdotal because it's kind of her own story or something like that. But like she mentioned this in one of the interviews. And like one of the first places she felt comfortable was like with wrestling and like the wrestling circuit and the people around wrestling, which was like kind of interesting to me. Like just um, like a peek into how that culture might change. But again, I think like there is like a weird way of like wrestling interacting with culture, because I've heard of like in the past specifically that like there have been people who have used like this kind of hatred of like a real person into like, or a stereotype into their characters, which I don't know, like I feel weird about it, like but like one of the examples was like one of the worst examples of this is New Jack, and like his like they did like his whole character, he was a African American guy, I don't know from where, but like his whole character was like just going to a small town and pissing all the rednecks off by saying all the things like that white like racists would like hate to like listen to. And one of the most controversial angles that he did was he did the Rodney King thing, but instead there was a black guy, and like now instead there was a white guy, and like black guys were hitting him. It was like a weird like way of showing that as an art form into a wrestling ring, but it like was super like controversial. Even like I don't remember when it was. Like I don't know, maybe early 90s or late like early 2000s. So yeah, like it's weird like how a lot of things are like kind of transitioned into wrestling and then they are portrayed as such.
Yeah.
Like even now, I think WWE sticks with a lot of cliches. Like, oh, if you are a foreigner, usually you are a heel.
Yes.
Oh,
Like they don't give
they're
your
still
character
doing
anything else.
that today? Is that still happening today? Like even
It's
with this
not
kind
as
of xenophobia and
it's not as blatant as it was then, but there's
Okay.
a hidden amount of it there that make you go. That's a little bit on the spectrum of xenophobia, but he is a jerk. So he is played up like I can't stand this guy. He's a jerk. He's arrogant. He's a cheater. He's a liar. But he's Bulgarian.
Because I mean, look, your name is Mustafa, which is an Arabic name.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering how people see that. Do they sort of hate on you for that, or do they use that against you?
The kids love me because that sounds like Mufasa.
Mufasa?
When they announce my name over the intercom in the arena and the lights come out and the smoke all that, they hear Mufasa. So they think I'm Lion King. So one kid's like,
Okay.
Mufasa! I'm like, oh, Emma! So it's all about getting a reaction. I'll run with it, but I'm a heel. So during the match, I'll do something to elicit a reaction from the kids where I pretend to pick up my opponent as Simba and then drop him. And then they get angry. And
Right.
I'll have you. But yeah, it is. They're getting away from that. Like before, they'll put blaring that you're from this place, and then you're this and that. Now it's you're this and that, and you're from this place.
I think there's also this problem of like I'm not sure how many promotions, but with WWE I've seen this, like they come from like specifically the guy running it, he comes from a time where like his motto is controversy creates cash. So a lot of the times he would use like some storylines. Like there's a openly lesbian wrestler, Sonia Deville, and she pitched a story like where she like wanted to do this like LGBT storyline, but with like a lot of subtlety in there and like a very nuanced long story. And what they did was like they just rejected her idea, and then they just used her partner in a like story where she just comes out, oh, I slept with this like woman of some wrestler, just for like a cheap, like a very oh my god, it's like a shock value thing. So like I think it also depends on like the different like cultures where different wrestlers came in, because I feel like it changed a lot to what it is now from what it was before. Because even like for like old time wrestlers, the stories that you hear about in interviews, a lot of the behavior was like kind of super weird and not acceptable. And it seems that wrestling has become more inclusive. It is like, as it has become more international, like I think that has kind of helped it, but it was like international before. But you see that change in the industry from like a more narrow-minded like group of people to more open-minded, and that's how I think the stories have also kind of evolved.
No, true. That's very true. As well as to touch base on a point that came to mind. Um, the storylines and storytelling, I mean, you take companies like WWE, for the most part, are written by people who aren't wrestlers. They're written by people who come from different backgrounds in terms of creative writing, and they come from universities. They don't understand the intricate story of a wrestler who's not able to do it physically at this time would get. So a lot of the things that they would write or pitch doesn't make that much sense as a wrestler. But if you go back 20, 30 years, the people who used to write the storylines were fellow more experienced wrestlers. And that's why the stories you see today and then is night and day.
Can you provide any input to that? Like if they're writing a story, can you say, oh, well, or can you make suggestions? Or
yeah,
you're not...
It's a group of writers, but their background is not professional wrestling. So they're writing it to try and get, and generate ratings or what they think the audience would want to see. However, as somebody who has who have watched a wrestling or a fan of wrestling, you watch that, you're kind of confused because to you it doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't make sense to a lot of other people. Now, in the old school times, they'll write a story that if you were following it, or even if you just had tuned in, it would captivate your imagination. Generally, off the bat, and it'll make you go, okay, let me go back and watch what happened a month ago, or 2 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago. Today, it's more of a for the attention span. Like coming back to a point someone had mentioned before, they go between heel to face, heel to face. Currently we have a lot. The vast majority of people that I run into, maybe this may be the case for some of you, this may not be, have a short attention span. So knowing that, how do we keep their attention?
What I meant is, you as a wrestler, when they're writing a part for you, can you provide some input to have them change it a bit?
You could, but it depends where you are in terms of the hierarchy. Like if you're the top guy, chances are what you said, I'm not doing that. They'll go, okay, we'll change that. But if you're in the middle of somewhere, they're like, maybe not. So then now you're tasked with now it shows your ability to take what they give you and flip it in a way that it makes sense while keeping what they're asking of you.
Would you say that from your experience being both a heel and a face, a hero and a villain, and acting the villain, have you learned anything interesting about life or about yourself? Has it brought you to any kind of personal realizations?
Yes, in terms of life, generally it's a lot easier to get people to hate you than to get them to like you. Being a face is not easy, because you will just assume that you come out there, you say all the right things, you do all the right things, that you're gonna get it your way. It doesn't necessarily mean to win the match, but to win the adoration of the people to the point where they care about you. However, what if it doesn't work? And then, so being a heel and being face, I'd say being a heel is, I can relate more to it because like very easy to tell people, hey man, I don't like you. And I'm not trying to not like you. I don't care if you don't like me. It's not my problem. But being a face, you gotta be careful because it's like, okay, this person just called me stupid. How do I like insult them, like, or not insult them, just get back at them, or show them I'm the bigger man.
Take the high road.
But yeah, exactly. Take the high road, but at a certain point, because you can't be at anyone's floor rub. At a certain point, you got to be looking. Okay, I'm not taking that.
When like in the role of a heel, I'm reminded of Kurt Angle when he flipped a couple times, but in particular there was the catchphrase "You suck," and he tried to flip back to face, and the entire crowd is just chanting it at him. Is there a thing as too much heat that you'll never recover
Yeah,
from?
because Kurt Angle is an extreme case, but too much heat is a bad thing as well. Because if they're so into you, they don't care who comes out of the audience. You cannot. You have to match your opponent to a certain point, but also get them to meet you halfway. They have to meet them halfway in terms of energy. If they're not meeting you there, then you did all that you can do. It's like I'm a big bad heel, and you come out and you're like, "Hey, my name's David." Who's that guy? Why should I care? Come on, I am David. I'm gonna kick his butt. Okay, I'm intrigued. You don't have to say that, but how will you convey that?
And there's another term which is called go away heat, where like you're hated by the crowd not because they want to see you get your ass kicked. They just don't want to see you. And even that like happens a lot of the time.
You don't want that. That's another bad type of heat. You get that, man. It's a tough day at the office.
So just touching on what Jeff was bringing up in terms of like your sort of on-stage life and your normal life, your outside life. So when you leave the arena, and you might walk past some people who recognize you. Who is Mustapha in those situations? Do you have to sort of in the back of your mind saying, "Shit, I can't be too nice to them because they think I'm just this badass guy who's gonna hate on them." How does that work for you? Like you're just navigating this kind of.
Ironically, I've been very fortunate for the most part. Everywhere I've been, I've always portrayed a good guy, which is very close to me in everyday life.
Okay, but I mean, you are a heel today, so how does that?
Today, in fact, depending where I go, but in Montreal, I'm a good guy. In Toronto, okay. I might be heel. So how does that happen for heel? I'll treat them like my opponent, but a little less.
Really?
Yeah. So I'll be like, you want me to sign an autograph? If it's a kid, I do it, but angrily. But if it's an adult,
you have to keep that persona even when you leave the job.
You have to because and it's also myself because I'm like, wait a minute, if this was just us in the street 2 minutes ago, you were booing me saying I suck. Now you want an autograph? I'm not signing anything. Me and everything. Like now, me as a wrestler, I'm not signing anything.
All right. And what about if you're like, let's just say you're in a setting, you're in a restaurant, having your dinner, and it's a sort of a quiet, respectful place, and somebody comes over and talks to you just to talk to you. Do you have to, regardless of whether they like you as a heel or don't like you, do you, like in a situation where it's a more polite, I mean, how would you have to react in those kind of situations?
In that, and I've learned this from my coach, Master Drew Onyx. He told us that you never know what that person is going through. That interaction, that little interaction that you have with them can be the change between them, like, and an extreme case, ending their own lives, or it could be they just lost a job, or the girlfriend has broken up with them, or boyfriend has broken up with them. So you interacting with them can be night and day. And this has happened to me. Where this was? This was Quebec City. I was we I was a bad guy there. And after the show, whatever, I went to a restaurant, we were eating my food, and this guy came up to me, he like, I like your work, this and that. And he generally came up to me, but I could tell there's something there. So I taught him everything about Google, and he's like, he came to a show here when I played a good guy. He came up to me and said, "Hey man, I never forget what you had told me in Quebec City." This happened a couple of years back. I don't remember the exact like where I was sitting and all that stuff, but I'm like, wow. And I answer him as myself, but still just dialed down. So I'm a bad guy, but I'm dialed down. But I give him a straight up.
Yeah, because I mean, like, it's, like people have multiple layers to them, right? We're three-dimensional, right? So I guess you can play within that context and.
Exactly. Especially if you're coming out of your way to have a conversation with me. Right. A few years ago, I was just a regular guy. So the fact that you come out to ask me a question or advice to the best of my ability, and knowing who I am, I will try and help you out.
Sounds like being a heel is a lot harder than being a face, because it's like you're always walking that tightrope, that line of being too bad versus not bad enough.
Yeah, because if it gets out that you were a nice guy talking to this guy afterwards, that could be bad for business.
Yeah. Watch out, Mustapha. We're gonna tell everybody.
Yeah, because he asked me a straight answer. I gave him a straight answer, and all the lines of know that whatever that you're going through in life, that you can overcome it. Like how I overcame my opponent, stuff to that effect, and like that. But you have to gauge it.
Yeah. Because ultimately, like, it's a blurry line between your performance, your on stage persona and real life. I mean, well, maybe it's maybe it's not such a gray line, but in the sense that ultimately you're dealing with real people with real problems, and so you can't just be this actor all the time, right? You almost have to show your humanity at some point, whether it's bad or good, whether you're just a generally bad person or a generally good person.
And I've met wrestlers who are the exact opposite of what they portray on screen. Like in real life, I don't have many kind words to use to describe them, but it's not kind. And they're portraying to be a good guy for the most part. But when you meet them in person, you're like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, right. Kind of like actors. I mean, you have actors, we think they're absolutely fantastic people because they portray these wonderful roles, and then you hear like on set they're absolute asses and rude, the most rudest people you'll ever deal with.
Hey Mustafa, I was watching a video before this call, one of your fights, and I saw that you're quite slim, and when I think about wrestlers, I usually remember these guys are super bulky and like steroid. They look like meatheads, right? So do you find it advantageous to be more slim and maybe more agile, or do you think, or does it even make a difference, or what do you think about that?
It's not as prominent now than it was then, because then they had a huge problem with steroids, and because WWE and most combat sports organizations have done away with the aesthetic aspect of being jacked up and big, and the fact that they're competing with MMA, where a guy who's 135 pounds can smoke a guy who's almost twice his size within a certain respect. Now, being in terms of being big and small, my weight itself has fluctuated, and I train at different things depending who I'm up against. If I know that you're a big guy, okay, and probably I have to stabilize it. Even in wrestling, I'm not trying to drop you on your head because that can kill you. So I have to know how to drop you safely. So by that, I'll probably add more weight. If I'm fighting a smaller guy, he's probably fast. I will adapt myself to their style, but also make them learn my style.
When you say small, you mean like 6'2", 220 pounds, right?
Yeah, or not. I mean, I've wrestled guys 280 pounds. I wrestled guys 130 pounds.
Oh, there's guys that wrestle at 130 pounds in your league.
And it depends on the weight class to be in. If it's open weight, then that's the type of match that you get. But the way I wrestle a guy who's 130 pounds is different than the way I wrestle a guy who's 280 pounds. Now I have to position myself from the perspective of the person who's watching. How would this make sense? So there's a hidden story before we even start. We have to kind of unearth it. Barnes has said each wrestler is the embodiment of a story. So by the way that you look, you walk, it's called eyeball test. Pass the eyeball test, okay, I have an idea how he's going to move and how he's going to wrestle. And now when you get in the ring and perform and do what you want to do, and it exceeds what they were expecting, then they are blown away.
So, do you have a favorite heel, like inspiration?
Nick Bockwinkel. If he was in Toastmasters, he would have been the world champion. Jeff, cheap plug, but his thing was he'd find a word that you wouldn't commonly use, and he based his promo off of that. And then the way he wrestled matched the way he spoke, very clean and pristine. But he would, at any time he could find an opportunity to win or cheat, he would take it. But it's never as blatant as the referee's right there, I'm gonna cheat. That doesn't make any sense. But he would find like subtle ways. Next would be Luthez, 1952 to I guess the 70s. He would, within the confines of the rules, break it. Just subtly. In wrestling, you cannot have a close-fisted punch. It has to be either palm strikes. So what he would do is put his elbow on somebody's face and tap his fist. The vibration will go into your jaw. Stuff to that effect. The referee said, use your fist. He said, no, I use that. Jake the Snake Roberts, his cadence, the way he delivers his words. Rock in terms of charisma, in terms of the way they fought. Ric Flair has the ability to make the most experienced and the least experienced guy seem amazing, because he's able to find what your strengths are and hide your weaknesses and tell a story knowing what your weaknesses are. So the next time somebody sees you, David, he's a bad man. Now you just have to live up to that new level.
Mustapha, I have two questions for you. Quite different, but I think they are quite interesting and they haven't been touched on.
Okay.
So one of the things like we're focused on is the in-ring action, but I think like one of the big aspects is promo and how does that fit into the story of the match? Because like the most recent and the most amazing thing that I saw was Eddie Kingston, who cut like a 30-second promo. He like came to the company. He was invited as like just for one match. He said stuff in 30 seconds, and now you were invested into that character. Like that's how good he is. And like the way he talks, like it's become a joke that somebody tell him that wrestling's not real because he's so good. So like the way heels cut their promos versus the way faces cut their promos, and how important that is into the aspect of the story. And the other question I have, like this is something that like really I want to learn more about and like understand, is from what I see and understand, like the culture of wrestling is very different in Japan, and like even in Mexico, like lucha libre is vastly different. And it's not just about like how they fight, but how the young wrestlers are treated, what kind of like practices they have to go through. I think Japan is like one of the young lions thing is like very famous for that. Do you also see like how heels and baby faces are different in their values in different countries? Like in Mexico, how would a heel behave? Like, are there some differences in how a heel behaves in Mexico, in Japan, in America, in Europe? Or like they are more or less around the same idea of a character? Or are there like traits which are more hated in one region because of like how their culture is compared to another?
To answer your second question first, in Mexico, they don't use the term heels and faces. It's technical and rudos. The rudos are more of the stable folks, and technicals are the people who are more acrobatic. Now, the mask is very symbolic in Mexican wrestling, and so that's a cultural thing. To be unmasked is a sign of disrespect to yourself and to your heritage. In Japan, the heels and faces, they often are fighting for a prize, and the prize generally can be a trophy, it could be a belt, it could be a contract. And in that story, there's often if they're both local, it's I want to be the top guy. He wants to be the top guy, but in his way, and that is a constant battle. In Europe, if you go in today's time, it's generally around Britain. It's how can I out wrestle you and make it into interchange to show that, hey, you and I are not in the same league. So yes, there are like cultural things, but for the vast majority, is still rooted in the story of good and bad. Now, to answer your first question, the difference in promos between a heel and a face is, what emotions are you showing in your face at this time, or you want to evoke in a listener's mind to make them go, I'm curious, who is he talking about? What's he talking about? Let me tune in. Because your job also is to keep that person glued to the TV for 30 seconds or 10 minutes. And wrestlers and movie star actors are held to the same regard pre-COVID, because our job, to put it at its simplest form, is to motivate you to leave your comfortable chair, couch, home, get in your car, bus, or whatever, come to an arena, pay for a ticket, sit in a chair for 2 hours or 3, and watch me perform for 10 minutes. How well can I do that, and how much can I do that consistently? So knowing that, the way we structure our promos, it will be based off of that, and it also depends on where we currently are in our storyline.
Adding to that question, it's interesting for me because I think like there are acting classes for actors, right? I don't suppose there are like promo classes, and like for a lot of wrestlers that I've heard, it seems like they just practice their promos by themselves and like learn from some people and got a little bit of help.
Yes.
Do you think like that kind of reflects back to life, where like if you get better at cutting promos, you start getting better at getting people's attention in a crowd, just because you have learned the little hints of like saying the right word, looking this in the right way to just like captivate the audience? Does that reflect back as you learn from these crowds and like bring it into your own life, that you have become like a better speaker, and like it has helped you not only like understands other people's emotions, but kind of manipulate is not the right word, but like bring forth some of the emotions that you want to in people?
Understanding yourself is very important, and how you deal with certain things. So one of our exercises, I learned this when I was in dramatic arts back in high school, is taking what you're about to say, but change how you say it over and over again. And just on another plug, this is what I do a lot for Toastmasters. I have a promo or a speech or whatever, and I say it in front of a mirror. Now I'd say it 8 times, the same thing, but differently. I'd be angry, I'd be happy, I'd be sad, I'd be indifferent. Now I want to see how my face reacts, how my body reacts. So when it's time to do a promo, I know I can touch on 6 to 7 different emotions to keep them through keep them through a roller coaster. So it's very important to notice. Also, applies to work, vocal variety and pitch and volume and your presence. You don't want to go to a job interview and talking, hi, my name is Mustapha. I'm here for the position. Hi, my name is Mustapha. I'm here for the position, and I believe I'll be a great candidate. It's knowing or having an idea of what you look like and how you sound like, and then knowing that and knowing how you are, and crank it up.
When do we see your next fight? And how do we get your tickets so we can watch you?
You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, Mustapha Jordan Brand, MUSTAPHAJORDIAN brand. The next ones we're still awaiting a clearance from the government, because as you know, we can't be involved in sports and whatnot. And the same thing goes for Ontario. That's about it. I have Facebook, Instagram.
Cool.
You can send me all that info and I'll post it on the YouTube.
We'll have to organize a meetup at one of these events, Jeff.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
So I had one last thing I wanted like just to comment on and get Mustapha's feedback, because like this is something which is quite amazing to me in terms of like storytelling that I've seen recently. So generally, like the stories that we see are about heels and baby faces, but the most recent, like the most liked story from my side, it's been the Hangman Page Kenny Omega story.
Okay.
And it's interesting in the sense that it doesn't follow the traditional wrestling idea of here's a baby face, here's a heel. It's a very like, I don't know, it's a like a story of a millennial who's insecure and like kind of is self-destructing, and a friend who kind of supported him in the beginning and left. And it's amazing to me because I know that eventually it's going to warp into the same story of like one of them will play the role of a heel, but the baby face.
Right.
But the depth in which the story is told and like what the story is right now is completely different. So the question for you is, have you seen like stories and how they are told in wrestling evolve from, let's say, the 1950s, 60s, 70s? And do they kind of reflect the anxieties and the feelings of a culture? Like the best thing about the Hangman storyline is because he represents this like anxious guy who thinks he's not good enough, and that's why he self-sabotages himself. And it's amazing how that is told, like in his like promos and like through a very long arc. And it's been like 6 months that story has been going on slowly. It's building up to like whatever so have you seen like how the stories were in 50s, 60s, 70s, and how they have started to differentiate and like evolve in some sense?
Yes, I believe now that because they tap into more stuff like wrestling is always evolving, and we borrowed from a lot of arts and martial arts. So knowing that and how things like if you go back to maybe the 80s and watch how they punch, just watch how they punch is different than how they punch in today's time. So knowing stuff just like that, now in terms of stories, yes, I like this storyline because it's relatable. Of the vast majority of the people who are tuning in are millennials, and they can like, yeah, I felt this the same way. You may not have displayed it the same way, but you can relate to it, and it's very important to know who you your the, the demographic is. If you could go back to the Attitude Era, a lot of things that went on, it wouldn't fly today. Simply because, case in point, the steel chair shots to the to the head, like because of the whole thing that we learned on concussions and safety, that had to evolve. I don't know if that answered it, or
Come again?
I don't know if that had answered your.
Yeah, kind of, because like it's interesting to me, like even to look at comedy and how it changes. Like
Yeah.
you had 50s comedy, 60s, and then like in the 80s to 2000s, like George Carlin era, it became very like against the authority. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because that was kind of reflected in the Attitude Era, which were a lot of stories like the Austin storyline was so good because it was a guy who was standing up to his boss. And like that was the big like cultural like thing which like was anti-authority. And now like comedy is kind of evolved and become like more edgier version of it, where
Yeah.
like the person is like kind of telling about his depression or anxiety, and like we laugh at it because it's funny. And I have a feeling that like it's interesting because any form of art, it kind of taps into the culture in which it is and like reflects the culture in a way. So
Yeah.
that's why this storyline has been so intriguing, because I feel like the duality always remains in any kind of story of the good and evil, but like there are other aspects of this story and how like we come to it, they change how of because of how the culture has changed, which is like this a superb thing, like just seeing how the story is being told. Like it's the same story, but it just changes a little bit to like become more relatable to a specific generation, which is fantastic.
Exactly. It's exactly that. You know, it's a beautiful thing.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Abhishek, Christian, David, and Raf. And especially thank you, Mustafa. We talked not so much about good and evil, more about heroes and villains, and we spent most of the time talking about villains. So I guess that tells us something.
Oh man, awesome.
Have a
Awesome.
good night, everybody.
It's the whole thing, the hero is as good as the villain.